That's some of what we'll be talking about. When the Shermans moved onto the property, they immediately noticed heavy dog chains bolted by each of the 4 exterior doors. They assumed that the Myers had a dog that they would move from one chain to the other to keep it out of the sun. But when Terry inquired about the dog to the previous ranch hand, he told him that they had 4 huge ferocious dogs that they kept chained at each of the doors. Another particularly strange, straight out of a horror movie type scenario was the Shermans noticed that inside of every door it had a heavy deadbolt.
Yeah, multiple locks on all the doors.
Right,
yeah.
Including in the hallways, and in one of the hall closets had a deadbolt on the inside.
Yeah, that's right.
Man, that's crazy, dude.
In April of 1995, now we're skipping over a little bit of some of the things we discussed in the previous podcast related to strange balls of light and everything that started appearing. But then on April of 1995, the weirdness dramatically escalated. While checking on his cattle one evening, Terry saw a glowing object pass over a 50-foot tall stand of poplar trees that frightened him and Gwen. They saw another unexplained flying object that they reported appearing as headlights.
Yep.
And they were of a dull yellow. They describe them as appearing almost like an old car headlight.
Yeah. Mm. Was this before or after the wolf?
This is before.
Okay.
This is before that. Terry started examining odd cattle deaths that they were finding on the property. First, a cow was found dead shortly after a UFO sighting showed, and this showed a hole in the center of its eyeball. Predators wouldn't touch the carcass, and the Shermans noticed a chemical smell in the vicinity. A short time later, a second cow was found dead and with a similar hole in its eyeball. For both of these animals, Terry took a wire and inserted it into the hole in the eyeball to check the depth. In both cases, the wire slipped easily to the center of the brain. Also during this time, the Shermans' cows started disappearing. As Sherman said, "We contacted everybody around. We looked everywhere. They just vanished." In one instance, Terry followed the tracks of a cow in fresh snow. The tracks just stopped under a tree at the edge of the field. The area around the animal where it had last stepped was surrounded by a circle of fresh twigs and branches which Terry could see had come from the trees above. That led him to believe initially that they were being taken by helicopter or something. He said the tracks just stopped. The cow was obviously extracted vertically.
Yeah, right.
In a rare occurrence, the Shermans found a mutilated cow within 5 minutes of its death. The young man had seen the gentle Angus eating peacefully and returned a few moments later and found it dead. The cow's rectum had been cored out with a 6-inch wide hole that was 8 inches deep. Now, we spoke last time about the phenomenon that they were encountering as far as these balls that would chase them around, and these blue balls that looked like 2 different liquids.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. And this eventually led to their 3 dogs chasing them into the woods, and then the dogs never returned.
Right.
And then they went back looking for the dogs the next day, and they found 3 greasy spots on the ground.
Yeah,
I remember that.
Right. And so that caused them to want to move. They had finally had enough. There was also an incident where, and we kind of briefly touched on this last time, they had some prize bulls. They had several prize bulls that they kept in a corral, and one day they left, and when they returned, the bulls were missing.
Yeah.
And they panicked. They jumped out, went to look for the bulls to see what had happened to them, and then they found that all the bulls had been put inside of this very small, like, container.
Yep.
It was like a trailer that was right next to the corral, and they barely fit in there. Like,
Yeah.
and the cows were like in a trance.
Yeah.
Or the bulls were in a trance. They didn't move until they tried to open the doors, and then they started panicking and
Freaked
started
out,
kicking.
yeah.
Right.
And basically destroyed the trailer.
Right. It was a mystery because they said, the odds of getting one bull in there was like non-existent, much less
Yeah.
all of them.
Right.
So they started experiencing all these things, and they finally about had enough.
And we should also mention that they raised Angus bulls, Angus cows. And so when they would lose a cow, it was a big deal because we're talking many thousands of dollars per animal in some cases. I remember in the book they were listing off like, you lose a cow and you've just lost a huge investment.
Yeah.
And those bulls, specifically their prize ones, were worth $10,000 each, something like that. So it's like, this is a big deal.
Right. Gwen, and as stories started getting out about this, for example, Gwen had a job at a local bank, and she lost her job because out of concern for what the people at the bank were hearing was going on.
Oh.
So, some people have suggested that they were doing this for some
sensationalism
form of
or
gain. Right, some form of gain.
Yeah. Why would you do that?
Right, it's absolutely not the case. And some of the research that has been done into some of their background doesn't support that. They weren't looking for publicity. This went on for, almost 2 years before they even started talking about it, and they immediately sold it, so it wouldn't make any sense. And they didn't sell it at a profit. In fact, I guess we'll cover that here. Due to his longstanding interest in the subject, in 1995, Las Vegas real estate developer Robert Bigelow created the National Institute for Discovery Science, NIDS, for the scientific study of paranormal phenomena. The organization was comprised of a staff and scientific advisory panel of many PhDs, including 2 former NASA astronauts, and was led by molecular biologist and chemist Dr. Colm Kelleher. NIDS began an investigation on Skinwalker Ranch in May of 1996, but by September, a deal had been finalized, and Bigelow purchased the ranch for $200,000, which is actually a little bit less than what the Shermans paid for the property. Terry also sold Bigelow a select herd of cattle and was hired to oversee the operation.
Yeah. They were kept on as managers.
Right. As part of the deal, the Shermans signed a non-disclosure agreement which barred them from making any further statements about the ranch or their experiences there, which that's another example of how there was really no benefit for them to be making up these stories, especially if they weren't, at this point, they weren't even allowed to discuss it anymore. So they did not profit from this in any way. The Shermans spent their last day on the ranch rounding up cattle. Late that evening, they were exhausted, so they locked all the doors and they put their children to bed. Gwen and Terry took hot showers and went to bed. The next morning, they awoke and found that their bedding was covered in blood. When they searched for a source, they discovered that they each had a 1/8 inch deep scoop mark in the same place on their right thumbs that served as one final reminder of their time spent on Skinwalker Ranch.
Oh, yeah.
Gwen stated, quote, "When we found the ranch, we thought we would be in heaven, but it turned out to be hell."
Yeah, that's right. Well, we could probably take a break there pretty soon here.
Yeah, the next part, we're going to kind of go into the next phase of the ranch, so this would probably be a good spot to take a break.
Yep. And there were, just to add, there were also, while they were still living on the ranch, they had weird animal sightings too, like the wolf thing that I mentioned. And it's a strange story, but it was basically like they thought it was a wolf, but it was a huge dog way bigger than anything they were familiar with, right?
Right. It walked up to him, right. It walked up to him.
Seemed
and
peaceful,
it seemed,
but it was a gigantic, which it reminds me of the big black dog sightings that you see like in the UK. You know, Rendlesham Forest has a bunch of these.
Right. It walked up to him. It seemed very calm and peaceful. And then inside of it was right next to a corral. And as a calf got close to the railing, this wolf dog thing grabbed a hold of it and started yanking on it.
Yeah.
And they started beating on it, trying to get it to release the calf.
Yep.
And finally, Terry had to run and get his rifle and shot it.
Yeah.
And it
seemed to have no effect.
It seemed to have no effect. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And he was basically like, I hit it, and it didn't even flinch.
And that was not the only time he shot. There was another time where they saw one out in a field and shot it.
Yeah, he shot it. Same deal.
They went out, no blood, no.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. It's
That's
really
freaking
strange.
weird, dude.
Yeah. Ghost dogs.
A big old puppers.
All right, let's take a quick break and we'll come back for more Skinwalker Ranch. And we are back, ladies and gentlemen, Brothers of the Serpent podcast, here with Marty talking Skinwalker Ranch, going through the history, looking at the details. And so we've just gotten to the part where the Shermans become the managers, and now the property is handed over to the NIDS project. So let's go from there.
Right. Initially, Bigelow's NIDS scientists were studying the project, but in 2007, an individual from the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, Dr. James Thomas Lakatsky, PhD in physics and mathematics, read about the ranch and had an interest in visiting the property. He contacted Bigelow and asked if he could visit, which is kind of unusual.
Yeah.
We did find out that, and this was discussed in the previous episode, that the DIA had a interest in the property for some reason prior to this.
Yeah.
But it's a little bit, makes you start to question what exactly is going on.
Right.
So Bigelow agrees to allow Lakatsky to visit the property, and just to give everybody a little bit of a refresher, within a few minutes of arriving on the site, Lakatsky is standing in the main ranch house, having a conversation with a couple of the other researchers or investigators, and has an experience.
Yeah, that's right.
An object appears in his line of sight specifically. In other words, he was the only one that could see it. And it was this object that was floating in the house, clear sight of him. This was not. There weren't a lot of details provided initially for years, and then more recently, information leaked out of what this object was, and it was a Mobius strip. Make sure I pronounced that correctly this time. That has, and Lakatsky being a mathematician, that shape had
significant to him. Yes,
and it was said to have some form of hieroglyphs around it.
Even better.
Right. But it was clearly a display that was tailor-made for him.
Right. Yeah, that's what it seemed like.
and he almost took it as though it was an open invitation. So he immediately flew back. He didn't make mention of this to anyone at the time. In fact, he didn't even tell Bigelow until sometime after he called and told him about it. But it raised his interest enough that he went to Harry Reid, who was the Senate Majority Leader at the time, and told him, "Hey, this place is special. There's something going on there. I really think that this may have defense. There may be defense interests in this. We need to study it." And Harry Reid went to a couple of his other senator friends.
Why would there be defense interests?
Anyway.
I don't understand. It's weird.
I hate to do this to you, but some of these questions will maybe be, I'm not saying answered, but may provide some insight. But I don't want to give any spoilers yet because I don't want you to know where.
Yeah, I'm just idly wondering,
right,
why there would be defense interests in this, but
there may be. And that may be a little bit more understandable once we start looking at the full picture of what's been going on for quite some time.
I would imagine that this guy, this mathematician, might recognize some significance to what he saw.
Yeah.
And may understand, they say hieroglyphs were on it, but maybe if it was tailor-made for him, he may have been able to figure some stuff out.
Yeah.
And that may be what prompted him to...
Yeah.
Go that route.
That's what the question is implying. Yeah. That's the point. Yeah, you're right.
Right. So as a result of the visit, Lakatsky goes back to the Pentagon. He goes to Harry Reid. Harry Reid talks to Senator Inouye, I believe it is, and one other, and they agree to fund this program. So the Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Application Program, otherwise known as OSAP, was set up with Lakatsky at the helm to oversee a $22 million study by the newly formed Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies Group, which was BASS, of the phenomenon on the ranch. So in other words, Bigelow Aerospace's new program. This was not NIDS. This was a completely separate Pentagon-funded program. Was the subcontractor to OSAP.
Okay.
They conducted a lot of different investigations. We were talking about this during the break, how initially it seemed as though that if you read Hunt for Skinwalker, and you read about a lot of the incidents that we discussed in the previous episode related to the portals opening up, and beasts, these black forms almost looking like Bigfoot crawling out of these portals and things, you get the impression that they had no idea what to expect. They had no idea what they were dealing with.
Yeah.
They didn't know how to address it. They were trying to set up things that were more or less pointless because, as you point out, the phenomenon knew they were there. It was always a step ahead of them.
Yep.
I'll give you an example of that we didn't discuss last time, I don't believe. And one of the advisors to BASS was Colonel John Alexander, Ph.D. He was the founder of the Advanced Theoretical Physics Project, program manager for non-lethal defense at Los Alamos National Laboratories, program manager of the Stanford Research Institute, SRI, and the Stargate program, scientific advisor to NIDS, and the author of the book Reality Denied. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists in 1994 said, quote, Alexander would make a splendid character in a science fiction novel. And Wired magazine wrote in 1995, Alexander had a resume lifted straight from the X-Files. So this highly credentialed PhD tells of an incident which he believes offers some of the most compelling evidence for what he terms as, quote, precognitive sentient phenomenon on the ranch.
One step ahead.
Yes. He explains that 6 cameras were set up to observe the main pasture. They were each mounted on towers and arranged in such a way that each camera could record the others. Each camera had its cabling run inside of PVC pipe from the camera down and ran underground back to the monitoring station. The PVC was secured to the tower by clamps, and an extensive amount of duct tape was used for safe measure. At 8:30 p.m. on July 20th, 1998, 3 of the cameras stopped recording simultaneously. When investigators went out to see if maybe a lightning strike had damaged them, they discovered that the wiring had been ripped from the cameras and that the PVC was laying bent and twisted on the ground. And even more puzzling, upon further inspection, they discovered that the clamps and duct tape securing them was missing altogether, along with several feet of the cabling itself. They searched the perimeter for several hundred yards, yet no remnants were found or signs of the perpetrators. The investigators then returned to the station to review the footage from the remaining 3 cameras to see what had caused the event. To their astonishment, despite the towers being clearly visible in the footage, no evidence of the malicious act was visible. The footage was then sent to a laboratory in Las Vegas for further enhancement, which revealed the exact moment when the tiny red power light on each of the cameras turned off simultaneously. Yet no perpetrator was visible.
Yeah.
The act took place between the 1 1/3 second frame rate of the recording.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's right.
Alexander stated, quote, "We came up with no theoretical possibilities for how this was accomplished. That was one event, but there were any number of other things equally disturbing, equally spread out over time and space, and equally different in how the presentation took place. So you end up with the trickster."
Yeah. That's right. I remember that being detailed, that the only way that they thought it could have happened was if something was able to do it in between 2 frames of the other working cameras.
That's crazy.
And 3 of them simultaneously.
Yeah, that's right.
They should have used more duct tape.
Gorilla tape.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, Sam Squanch has a problem with Gorilla Tape.
So, Bass investigators Roger Pinson and George Onet commented on their experiences on the ranch, stating, quote, "We were turning our attention to the other communities in Utah out about 50 to 100 miles away from the ranch. We would go and investigate Bigfoot sighting reports or UFOs or anomalous objects that had fallen from the sky in conjunction with UFO sightings. Oh, and an alien abduction. I experienced a lot of phenomenon that George and Colum documented in the book, Hunt for Skinwalker. It was very startling. I'm here experiencing paranormal phenomena and UFO craft. It was quite a challenge, to say the least. This is not natural phenomenon, so you are really hard-pressed to put scientific method on it. You can put forensic science on it, but what it really is an intelligence matter, because this is a phenomenon that is under intelligent control.
Yeah.
It's transient, it's not repeatable, and it occurs because it's intelligent and interacting with humans."
Yeah. There you go. It's an intelligence matter.
Details of the interaction with said sentient intelligence was later disclosed in a recent interview by George Knapp with the private citizen who has invested more of his own money into the study of anomalous phenomenon than anyone in history. Knapp asked Robert Bigelow for his opinion of what kind of intelligence was being dealt with on Skinwalker Ranch. His response went further, divulging surprising information on the type of experiments that were being conducted on the ranch. Bigelow stated, quote, it was either discarnate entities, non-human entities, or ETs. We could just about eliminate everything else because it would be impossible. I mean, you can't be 500 miles away and make requests that things show up on camera. You have witnesses that are taking pictures on a camera, and you ask them, what is it that you're seeing in the camera? And they have no idea what to say because it's something you've had no communication with them about, and they're just describing it to you. And it's exactly what you requested. And you do it again, and you do it again, and there are different kinds of things that are showing up as to what you requested, and they're telling you this on the telephone.
I don't understand what the...
Think about what he's saying there.
Well, that's what I'm trying to work it out.
What they were doing, let me read this next paragraph and then we'll discuss this. Bigelow goes on, what it was all about was games. There were instructions through participating in games that we would set up, and we would verify. The controls on the games could not have been manipulated by a human or any person in the meantime. Knapp said, and it worked. Something moved these things around, Bigelow. Oh, absolutely. We took pictures, of course, before and after. And nobody else was around to do that. The reestablishing of the game was better than if we had set it up. There was more information being given by the way it was reconstituted than the way we had established the game to begin with. It was all about messaging. It was all about instructional kinds of things. Knapp, were you on the verge of communicating a couple of times? Was there a back and forth, or didn't you ever really establish did you ever really establish who you were communicating with? Bigelow, we didn't know who we were communicating with. Mm-hmm. So what he's saying, this was new information. This just came out within the last few months. What he's saying is they would have two different individuals. They would have one at a remote location 500 miles away from the ranch, and they would set up a room with cameras, and they would have the person 500 miles away communicating with this sentient intelligence, making requests. Then the room at Skinwalker where the cameras were set up, they would be recording, and whatever the request was made 500 miles away would get the response would happen in the room. And it was documented on film.
In what form are these responses? I mean, they were talking about the game.
They're saying making things appear. This was visual.
Okay.
So what are we dealing with here?
So he's trying to say that it would be impossible for the guy 500 miles away to like call somebody that was local at the ranch and say, "Okay, do this."
Right. The individual in the rooms, the researchers, investigators that were in the room where the cameras were had no idea. In other words, it was like a double-blind study.
Right.
They had no idea what the requests were.
Right. Okay. Gotcha.
And this was being verified by a third party that was watching.
Observing
in other words,
the
they would
whole
say,
thing.
right. They would say, "What do you see?" And they said, "We see this appear," or "We see this," or they would ask it to reconfigure things. They would set up. I don't know whether they were blocks or didn't provide detail, but they would set up. They would set up something and this thing would reconfigure it in such a way where there was information being conveyed.
Yeah.
But what does that tell you? How does this and this will tie in.
The person making the requests, how were they making the request, just in their mind?
Apparently so. We'll get into that a little bit further into this. There's more to this. Okay. But this is a particular aspect of the phenomenon that's not necessarily well known. It's not discussed in the books. It's not. There's just something else. But how? In other words, it suggests bilocation. How can
the intelligence know what that guy's asking,
right? How can
and also be there to manipulate
exactly.
it at this? Yeah, okay.
It's either bilocation or omnipresence.
Right.
Or there's many of them, and they can talk to each other
Instantly. Yeah.
Right, but this is something more complex than.
I mean,
Skinwalker
it's
that haunts him.
It's weird that this ranch, this piece of property, would have, like that. In other words, the phenomena is so local to this ranch. Like, I know you were saying that this is not just a thing that's happening on this ranch, but it's like, why would the ranch or that particular area have all this activity, and yet you can seem to communicate with it 500 miles away? So why is the activity focused in this spot? That's just weird, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And in the book, you know, he kind of goes through how the Ute tribe there, they know this property is like this. They're totally aware of it.
Yeah.
And it's specifically focused on the ridge line, right? They talk about the ridge there that's on the property. There's a high ridge that goes through, and that's where they consider it to be, or that's their landmark for the property, right? It's the ridge that goes through this area, and that's where they know to kind of stay away from that whole area around that ridge. But they saw multiple lights, craft, you know, manifestations along that ridge line all the time.
Right, and that's where I'm getting to. That, to me, granted, the cattle mutilations and those things they're sensational, but they're not as profoundly significant to me as things like this. Now, Kyle asked a legitimate question that we're going to circle back to, because that was the first thing I thought as well.
First rule of doing podcasts with Marty: your questions never get answered when you ask them.
I don't. It's like a card game. You don't lay all your cards on the table all at once.
Toying with
It's called dramatic effect.
I'm all in, buddy.
Yeah.
I'm all in.
We love
Show
it.
me what
We love
you
it.
got.
Yeah.
Okay, so Bigelow described another phenomenon studied on the ranch that's been widely described in vast numbers of encounters dating back decades. Quote, "We had simultaneous photos in different places of things that would happen. There were no reasons for photons to travel 5 or 6 feet and stop. And everything is black behind." This is a little bit hard. Bigelow, he almost speaks like he starts something and he stops, and then he kind of reconfigures his statement. So when you read direct quotes from him, it's like you almost have to correct it in a way, because it doesn't necessarily... It's hard to do it unless you like actually use the same emotion that he's using when he's reading it. So these are, if it sounds like I'm struggling, some of it is just the way he speaks.
Yeah, dialogue is kind of difficult to read.
So he's saying there's no reason for photons to travel 5 or 6 feet and stop.
Yeah.
He says everything is blacked out behind it because of that. We don't know what. And that's as far as the photons would travel.
Yeah, so in other words, they're hitting something that they can't even see.
Yeah.
What he's talking about, I guess I understand the phenomenon that I'm familiar with the phenomenon he's talking about. He's just not describing it necessarily very accurately. But what he's saying is the beams of light are not like a laser. They actually can stop.
Lightsabers.
Right. Right. This is a phenomenon or a theme that we hear throughout history with UFOs. In fact, you touched on it on the Michigan UFO podcast.
Yep.
The observation that they had with the triangular UFO, they were talking about the lights, and he was saying that it was weird that
they don't make a beam.
Right. Yeah. They do not illuminate the surrounding area. In other words, they illuminate, but they do not project photons.
Yeah.
This is kind of the same thing. In other words, whoever this intelligence appears to have control over is either a different form of light that we're unfamiliar with, or they have achieved control over photons.
Yeah.
They can actually stop a beam midstream. In other words, this could explain things like dashes of light, like you described, things like that. In other words, I guess I look at everything as no matter how weird it might seem, I look at everything as some form of technology, even magic or anything. They're all, it's just something that's not understood.
Yeah.
But in other words,
it may be a whole other spectra that we're completely unaware of that as a side effect emits some light. And so it can appear the light just stops, but really what we're seeing is the effect of this other spectra causing photons, right? I mean, there's many possibilities there, but I see what you're saying.
I guess what I find interesting about this is that we're starting to hear details of the types of studies that were taking place on the ranch.
Yeah.
That we didn't hear. I mean, these happened well over a decade ago, and we're just now starting to hear.
Yeah, and you're right. So the NIDS thing and basically everything that's contained in the Hunt for the Skinwalker book is early days for their whole project, right. And we've never really gotten the details of the stuff that happened after that.
Right. Like this one's pretty interesting too. Another Bass investigator described a Skinwalker-like close encounter with a shadow being. Quote, I recall falling asleep for an afternoon nap. Suddenly, I felt a powerful tugging sensation and something like an electrical shock. I was pulled into consciousness, but found myself in a strange and vaguely familiar environment. My impression was that I was in the same room I had fallen asleep in, but I was perceiving a different layer of causality. On my left was a massive black shape that I can only describe as a living black skin of electrified nothingness. Black hole came to mind as the creature appeared embedded into the physics of an alternative realm. I watched as the shape morphed from an anomalous black mass to the shape and size of a large ape, growing an arm right before my eyes. The arm reached out and grabbed my wrist. I felt the electrical shock pass through me. I realized that I needed to move back towards normal conscious reality and quickly. After that, I can't exactly remember what happened at that point. I recall several similar incidents of being inside of a spinning swirl or tunnel, which the sensation was rather disturbing. I recall thinking that my consciousness was being digested or something to that effect.
Whoa. That sounds like sleep paralysis, really.
Yeah.
It does, but...
and I'm not saying sleep paralysis is the explanation. It's just people that have...
I've
that
had
type of experiences.
I've had sleep paralysis my entire life. I know exactly what it is. It's... You have this sense of helplessness. I mean, you try to wake yourself up from it, but I mean, I've had it dozens upon dozens upon dozens of times, but I always know what it is. Never once have I ever sensed that someone else was in the room or that something was approaching me or anything like that.
I did. I had it one time that I can remember, and there was somebody else in the room, and I thought I knew who it was. But it turned out not to be that person. And I felt the electric shock feeling. Just the description of that was like very similar.
Yeah.
And it was near an Indian mound, too.
Yeah, I was going to ask, are you sure it was sleep paralysis?
No,
that's what I'm saying.
That's what my point was, right? I'm pointing out that like this is we call this sleep paralysis. There's a term to describe that type of stuff, but it doesn't mean that's the explanation. That term is the explanation for what's going on.
Yeah. Or that all sleep paralysis are the same.
Yeah.
Even if they feel that way.
Okay, so you're continuing the quote. After recouping normal consciousness, the source explained, I awakened and I was back in the normal daytime room with the unusual poltergeist phenomenon very near me. So now he's awake and still experiencing this.
Yeah.
Clicks, knocking sounds, etc., moving from one location in the room to another. I believe that this was the one event where I was actually able to experience something of the nature of the source of this strange phenomenon. So, was it a dream within a dream?
Yeah.
These are scientists struggling with, I guess
Yeah.
you'd say, normal types of problems that they attribute to, non-scientists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They like to claim that they are more objective than us, but here they're describing essentially the same thing that
Yeah.
common everyday people have described.
Right.
How are we doing on time? Good?
Yeah, a little bit more, yeah.
Okay. In 2012, author Gary S. Beckham asked Dr. Eric Davis if he had. Eric Davis was one of the heads of BASS, and he worked with NIDS as well.
Okay.
Okay. He was asked if he had any thoughts on how to distinguish anomalous perception from externalized phenomenon. Was the fog reported real, or was it simply a psychotronic effect? Was the fog inducing psychotronic changes in the brain of the observer, or was the fog merely a perception created by some other phenomenon? And how did he determine if that fog was a multiple intelligence manifested in the form of a dark cloud or cloud-like effect, which had an unusual turbulence effect? Rather complex question.
Yeah. What fog is he talking about? What's the context around the...
This is those infamous black clouds we've heard about
Yeah. Okay.
in numerous other encounters
Yeah.
on and off the property. This was Davis's response. There were multiple voices that spoke in unison telepathically. Four senses
Paimon.
Four senses were in their control, so there was no odor, sound, smell, or touch, and overall body motion was frozen, as in the muscles would not respond. Afterwards, when completely freed from this event, after the dark shadow disappeared, there were no lingering or residual odors, sounds, etc. in the immediate environment. The voices were monotone males with a very terse and threatening tone. The creature and shadow incidents occurred a half-mile away at different times and dates, so there was no causal connection between these things. Beckham was particularly interested in the details of Davis's report of a telepathic attack on the ranch. Davis also reported visual contact with something unusual by the NID staff. Quote, and he's referring here to the incident with the tunnel, the portal that opened
Okay.
up. And
Yeah.
Here's a quote. The ITT, because this was a question that came up in the last episode. We talked about the night vision and how that might have affected
Yep.
what they were seeing. Here's
Because
Davis-
one guy was looking optically and just saw like an orange light. But
Right.
the other guy had night vision and saw what he thought was a tunnel with a being crawling through it
Right.
from the same light. Yeah.
This is the quote from Davis. The ITT night vision binocs are not IR, infrared, explained Davis, regarding equipment used to view the strange phenomena. They amplify the ambient background light by several thousand times. However, this ambient light is in the near infrared, but there are other shorter wavelength components to the light in the nighttime air that were very weak in intensity. Anyway, the significance is of seeing the creatures and the dark shadow entities appear in the binocs instead of in the unaided eye means that the entities / phenomena do not emit light, do not reflect light, and possibly might absorb ambient light.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The anomalous black cloud references appear often in UFO reports on the ranch and may provide some evidence of something far stranger than military technology might explain. The Ogden, Utah Standard Examiner from July 26, 1894 stated, quote, "Last Friday evening, Bernard Perry and his wife are reported having seen a most unusual phenomenon. As they were nearing their home in Mauritius settlement about sundown, they observed a small black cloud in the direction of North Ogden, coming swiftly towards them. The cloud seemed to enlarge, then collapse again, and all the while rapidly moving towards the southwest. When it approached within 150 yards of the road, it seemed to stop and remain motionless in the air. The sides appeared to be folded towards the center and pinned, something like the uniform hat of an old Continental's, and resembled the mesh of a net. In the center appeared to be many small birds, part black and part white. All at once the cloud wheeled towards Ogden and in a moment was lost from sight. The other parties living north of Marriott's claimed to have seen the same startling phenomenon."
Yeah. You know where else these black clouds, these small, strangely shaped black clouds appear? Is in all the reports of things raining down from the sky, like frogs and fish and lizards. Like, there's so many reports that you go through the Book of the Damned, you know, with Charles Fort, and it's all the time they say this small black cloud appears, and then weird stuff rains out of the sky over the area that black cloud passes.
That's crazy.
And I'll remind you of UFOs Part 1, where Juan Perez describes the entity pointing and saying, remember he said, "We have to get back to work."
That's right. Yeah,
points
that's right.
towards the cloud,
Yeah.
that they had to tend to the dark cloud.
Yeah.
And subsequently, Juan Perez had multiple nightmares about these clouds.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Ugh.
Yeah. All right. Well, we got to take a break. Last one, and we'll get to fourth segment. Right?
Yep.
You gonna need 6 segments? 7?
I think we got 2 more segments.
All right, we'll be right back.
Yeah.
And we're back, ladies and gentlemen, with the fourth and not final segment of this episode of Brothers of the Serpent podcast. So we got a lot to cover, so let's get back into it, buddy.
Okay, so the OSAP program received Pentagon funding from 2007 to 2012. Interestingly, in 2012, Dr. Eric Davis denied that NIDS had any connection with the U.S. government. He, quote, "National security had nothing to do with NIDS, and NIDS had nothing to do with national security. NIDS was a privately owned and funded UFO think tank." Here we see an example of how government secrecy works. Davis wasn't not lying when he stated that the NIDS program had nothing to do with national security and was privately funded. However, he did not disclose that at the same time, Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies, not NIDS, was being funded by the Pentagon.
Right.
The same employees, just being paid from a different pocket.
Yeah. Double dipping.
Yeah. So the program was canceled in 2012, and in an interview that Alejandro Rojas with Open Minds TV did with George Knapp in 2018, he asked him about the Bass OSAP Skinwalker connection and inquired about the cancellation. And this was Knapp's response. This is a quote from Knapp. "The full thing has not been told, and I'm not sure I can tell you part of it because it's already been shared, and I've release some of the details, but it's a bit of a multi-level intrigue of how the Pentagon works and how contracts work. In essence, opposition grew to the OSAP program. It was interacting with Elizondo at ATIP, and there was an exchange of information back and forth, and those two programs were separate for a while, but they cooperated. And this alarmed some people in the Pentagon who are in particular, there is a cabal there. That's the way he said it. It's a broken sentence, but he refers to this cabal. Nick Redfern has written about them. I figured about, and this is still the quote from Knapp, I figured out what his name was for them. I don't think that's the real name, but it's basically a group of high-level people from different intelligence agencies who are fundamentalist Christians, who think that anything involving UFOs or the paranormal is satanic.
Is demonic, yeah.
And that by studying it, we invite Satan into the world, and they wanted it killed for those reasons. I know how that sounds. I'm not belittling anybody's religious beliefs, but man, what kind of decision-making, deciding to kill a program that's doing good work because Satan might be involved. I don't feel better about the Pentagon when I hear that, but it's the truth.
What was the name? He wrote a book about it. I heard quite a few of Redfern's interviews after he published this book. What was it called?
We'll be talking about that.
All right, dang it!
Don't ask questions, damn it!
Freaking broke the first rule again.
This is still a quote from Knapp. Now, there were other factors involved, and there was a bit of political intrigue there at the Pentagon. Somebody sees a pile of money, and they consider it valuable or vulnerable, and they will go after it just for other reasons. And so the money was pulled out from under it. Bigelow continued to fund it for a year, fought his darndest to keep it alive, but in the end, it got sunk, and it was a shame. And for whatever was left of OSAP, it got merged into ATIP.
Okay.
In 2000...
So was Elizondo involved in OSAP at all?
No.
No.
They had a relationship, but they were two separate programs.
Right.
And we'll be getting into... I hate to keep saying this, but we'll be getting into what ATIP was up to at that point in time.
All right.
They were studying something else.
Yeah.
That's equally interesting.
Okay.
Okay. In April of 2016, Skinwalker Ranch was purchased by Adamantium Real Estate LLC, owned by the multi-billion-dollar real estate developer Brandon Fugel. He states that he purchased the property as a healthy skeptic, but was willing to invest his considerable resources into investigating the claims. He assembled a team of researchers, and they installed a vast array of technology on the site to get to the bottom of the alleged phenomenon. This journey is now being documented in the History Channel series, The Secrets of the Skinwalker Ranch. However, more recently we learned that there may have been more to the story behind the reasons for the OSAP cancellation. In a recent interview, George Knapp asked Robert Bigelow for his thoughts on the activity on the ranch. And this is going to be the back and forth between the two. Bigelow: I got very disturbed towards the end about something that happened to some of the government people, and I realized, oh, holy crap. Knapp: hitchhikers. Bigelow: well, yeah. Hitchhikers being that you take things home with you.
Yeah.
Everybody took something home with them. I took things to my house. Things happened to my wife and to me. Different things. But we didn't know that, was it like going to be kind of permanent? We didn't know if it was going to stay or maybe for years or the rest of our lives. Who knows? But the ones that bothered me a lot, where somebody got hurt or really disturbed, not that happened on the ranch, it was when they left the ranch. Like you say, hitchhikers.
Yeah.
And these were government people, and it affected them in very dramatic ways. And there was a cousin to that. and that's what we're facing. But it's abated, at least for now. And this other survival topic of a very dramatic thing, we wanted to have reduced or stopped.
Yeah.
So it would appear that these hitchhikers, this, again,
The
either
phenomena following you
bilocating
home.
or
Yeah.
omnipresent phenomenon, attached itself to the people who worked on the project.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in a way, the
And
Christians were right.
Yeah, it does sound demonic.
I mean, they have their own words and ideas, concepts behind what their belief is, but I mean, technically, they're right. You go and study it, and then it follows you home and starts messing with everybody's lives.
yeah.
There's a lot of ways this stuff can be interpreted.
Yeah, and so but those interpretations come from ancient texts ultimately, and ideas that have been passed down for a long time. About the nature of the other world.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Yes, they are.
The abyss looks back.
yeah. Stop looking at me, Abyss.
So those are deep questions that
I was asking the
Maybe
wall
we-
about. I wasn't actually.
no remember I said that in order to get to part 5 we needed to do a Skinwalker segment.
Yes. Yes.
The way I remember it is that I demanded a Skinwalker segment.
Well, there's in this conversation there are several points, several little bits of information that will be circling
connect,
back to
yeah.
that connect to the things we'll be talking in.
That's cool.
Because what I'm trying to do is I've been challenged. There are people that maybe don't understand where I'm going with this, and they struggle to understand the connections between some of the things, some of the phenomena that I've discussed, and probably more so in the stuff I'm going to be bringing up. And so I'm trying to maybe give examples of where there's overlap between these things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So there are those that are skeptical.